you a home grower looking for a little bit of help? Are you ready to learn as much as you can about your favorite hobby? The Homegrown Helpers brings you informative interviews from experienced growers that have taken the next steps in their journey and decided to help you grow top quality cannabis all in your home. Now welcome in our host, Rob Smith, along with this week's Homegrown Helper. And welcome to the show, everyone. Are you ready for this week's grow tips and tricks from another homegrown helper? Yes, me too. First, we have some things to ask of you, our audience. Like any other podcast you listen to, we reach more people when you rate, review, subscribe, and share. So if you like what we hear on this episode and what we're all about here at Homegrown Helpers, please take a moment and consider sharing us with your circle of friends. As you may already know, we are the second podcast in the Growcast family of podcasts. And if you haven't given a listen to Growcast, I really wish you would. Jordan interviews some amazing industry leaders and entrepreneurs from all over the cannabis industry doing all sorts of exciting things, but also brings you amazing grow advice via the show regulars like Wolfman and Michael Travers. Also, if you're in the market for your very own homegrown helper, please reach out to us, no matter where you are in the country or the world for that matter, or where you are in the growing journey. We've got you. Whatever you need, whether that's basic grow setup and to get you going, or troubleshooting a particular problem you've been having and haven't been able to resolve on your own, we've got you covered. Just reach out to us here at the show. You can reach us via email, thehomegrownhelpers@gmail.com. Find us on the web, thehomegrownhelpers.com, or at Instagram, the basic handle of The Homegrown Helpers. So even if you're not in Alaska, like our next guest is, but you want to hook up with them, we can make that happen, whether that's a video call, just a phone chat, whatever. We can help make that happen, but we'll also give you Chris's information later on down the road. So last thing before we get into our interview with this week's Homegrown Helper, we need to thank our sponsor, Coconut Weather Sensors. More about them in a little bit, but if you don't have a weather sensor for your grow rooms, you aren't sleeping as soundly as you should be. You can use the code GROWCAST at checkout to save 10% off anything on the site, coconut.com. That's KOKONAUT.com. And now that I can cross all that stuff off the list, let's welcome to the show today's homegrown helper, Chris from 907 Loud Gardens.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So Chris, we're going to start you off with an easy one. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how long you've been growing cannabis, and what made you decide to take the leap and decide to help other people learn how to sustain for themselves?
Yeah. So I am located up in Alaska. I grew up here and I've been growing for about 10 years. I went to school down in Colorado. So I was there. I lived in Boulder from 2007 till 2012, which was a big time there in the cannabis industry. Basically witnessed, things go from a totally black market to a gray market all the way to, the full-on legalization. And so in 2009, I got my medical card there. And then shortly after that, got my caregiver license and grew for 6 different patients. And at that time, it was a really interesting time in Colorado because it was a great time for the home grower because you could just grow, you could get a license and grow in your house and literally go into a dispensary. And if they liked your product, they would just buy it from you on the spot, which was pretty amazing looking at how far it's come from then. But, maybe not the best for the consumer because there wasn't really any testing or anything. And people were bringing stuff from California. And it was just like, they call it the Wild West days,
right.
Is what they refer to it now. So, but that's really what sparked my passion from kind of seeing cannabis as more of a business. I grew up, cannabis is a huge part of the Alaskan culture. So I've been a consumer for, since I was a teenager up here, and there's just always been a lot of great homegrown cannabis in Alaska. So To me, it seems like the industry is just moving in this direction of these bigger and bigger commercial grows, and so kind of my mission is to help the home grower produce better quality cannabis at a lower price, because I feel like when they get to these huge scales, they're just not able to compete with the quality that you can do when you really put that care and attention into each individual plant that you can do on a home scale. So yeah, I've been growing for about 9 or 10 years now.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, that's what we're all about here at the Homegrown Helpers. Obviously, is helping that home grower become more sustainable for themselves and not have to rely on anybody else for their medicine or their cannabis, whether they refer to it as medicine or not. So,
Right, totally.
so when did you end up back in Alaska? You said you were in Boulder from '07 to 12. Did you go right back up to Alaska and start growing up there again?
Yeah, pretty much. I took a little time and did some traveling, and then I was back here growing in 2014, and have been at it up here since then. And so I have, smaller home grow, and then I've worked with some like smaller licensed cultivation too, like craft. They do a limited 500 square foot license here. That's a little easier to get. So yeah, I've been growing up here since then.
Cool, cool. So you said a 500 square foot license? That sounds like a perfect home grow license, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on where you are in Alaska in terms of, if you're in Anchorage, you can't get a license to grow in your home, but out in the valley where I am now, you can get a license for in residential areas. So that's pretty
Hmm.
sweet.
So, Chris, why don't you tell us about your current grow setup? You know, how big's the room? What type of lights do you have? How many plants you rocking?
Yeah. So I have two different rooms set up right now. I feel like there's big differences between, home grow and then commercial grow in terms of, a lot of times in a home grow you're dealing with a lot of different constraints, and so what works for some people might not work for you. So I have one room that has shorter ceilings, so I'm using single-ended air-cooled lights in that room. It's a 8,000 watt room, and so I run 4 plants per light in that room and let them get a little bigger. Although I'm currently experimenting with, I built a rolling hydro table and kind of messing around with experimenting with like sea of green, where it's more like 12 to 16 plants per light. And then I have another room where I have 6 of the Gavita double-ended 750 watt lights, which are really nice if you don't have those tall ceilings that a lot of like warehouses have. So if your ceilings are, 10 to 10 feet or less, 10 and a half feet or less, then those 750s are a really good option, because those 1,000 watt double ended are, you just need those tall ceilings. So it's not for every home grower to use those.
So let's take the smaller room there, the shorter ceiling. What type of or how many plants do you have in there? How big is the room?
Yeah, so the room is about 20 feet by 12, or I'd have to double check the dimensions, but it's 4 plants per light, so I have around 32 plants in there. I grow hydro style, with Grodan, Rockwool. I use the little grow cubes, and I run an ebb and flow bucket system.
Mhm.
It's kind of the way I started growing in Colorado, and just it works for me. I like the buckets, because if you're constrained on ceiling height, then the tables can be a little tricky to keep things at the right height. So the buckets are a nice option, um, for the home grow, because it you make the best use of your height space.
Sure.
So I have two different reservoirs and basically two different 16 site ebb and flow systems in that room.
Great. So, Chris, getting into a little bit of the grow advice, what's the most impactful move a grower can make, in your opinion? What's the most impactful move a grower can make to improve overall plant health?
Yeah, to me, that's the key, is just maintaining a proper grow room environment. That's almost, I think everything cascades off of that. If you put your plants in the right environment, they're going to thrive. If you don't have the environment right, then anything else you do really isn't going to matter, and you're not going to be able to leverage, your nutrients or CO2 or anything. So, to me, the biggest key to that is VPD, or vapor pressure deficit, which is a way to basically fine tune your water flow and transpiration out of the plant and kind of slow that transpiration down. A lot of grow rooms are not humid enough. I feel like growers are constantly taught that, high humidity equals powdery mildew, and later in flower, you definitely can have some issues with botrytis if you do run too high of humidity. But I like to start out at around a 70% humidity using I use a hydrofogger, or I have an Ideal Air, 200 pint humidifier. And that has really just been a game changer, getting that humidifier. And it really, you just notice a difference when you transplant your plants. They don't have the same transplant shock, and you can see, the color, the size of the leaf, the rate of growth, everything is just accelerated. So VPD is a really important concept to figure out. One really cheap thing that I recommend to anyone is getting a little infrared thermometer, so you can actually read the leaf temperature, which is key, because a lot of times people are just looking at their temperature sensors, which is great, but what's more important is the temperature of the leaf, and that way you can see if there's any hot spots and just how the temperature of your canopy is. I spent a lot of time chasing like phantom deficiencies and different things, and it turns out a lot of those are really related to your VPD. So if your humidity is too low, the plant's drinking too much water, which causes it to take up too much nutrients. And so that's just the first thing to really check for, is make sure that you're running the proper humidity. Um, I was aware of that concept, but I used to kind of wait till the plants were big enough to transpire and create their own humidity. But really, like those first 2 weeks when you put a plant in the room, if you can run that high humidity, they just take off. So that's a pretty easy thing for most people, to get a little humidifier and keep that humidity at the right level.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation of VPD. It also plays a part in, plant health and bug and pathogen prevention.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. The plant can fight those things
Right.
off. So you can have a situation where you have those things in the room, but you're not even seeing an impact because the plant is performing at optimal
Right.
levels. Whereas, if that plant is unhealthy, then it's super easy for pathogens to take over.
Totally.
So,
So if a new grower was coming up to you, Chris, and was like, "Hey, what I need to get more out of my plants. I'm just not yielding enough." What's the one thing that you would suggest to them to pay more attention to?
well, what I recommend is, and this is not for everyone, depends really on your setup, but a sealed room. If you can swing setting up a sealed room, that's huge. When I switched over to running sealed rooms, my yield almost doubled with just changing that one factor. And so running a sealed room means you need to basically generate the entire environment within the room via air conditioning and dehumidification. So it's not for everyone. If it depends on your scale. If you just have a couple plants in a closet, it's really not practical to set that up. But if it makes sense for you, and if those, if doubling your yield would make sense financially, to put those extra costs in dehumidification and air conditioning, that's just a huge thing, because that allows you to run your CO2 at a high level, which is what really drives photosynthesis and yield. So once I switched over to sealed room, it's like, man, I'll never go back. It's just a big change.
Interesting, interesting. That is the first time that we've gotten that particular tip, but I can definitely see where you're going with that. You're obviously very big on the environmental controls, and having a sealed room allows you that minute control over, as long as you have, like you said, the proper air conditioning and the ability to have those controls. Having that sealed room puts everything on lockdown, so that
Totally.
if you want to change the temperature 5 degrees at night in your last couple of weeks, you can do that.
Totally.
As opposed to open rooms, you don't have that ability.
Exactly. And keep that humidity up and all that. It helps as well, because if you're bringing in outside air, that's going to lower your humidity. And in Alaska, there's just a lot of kind of nuances up here because everything's so expensive.
Mm.
So, in Colorado, I could go to the grocery store and get a 20-pound CO2 tank for like $6.50 or $7 for refill. And up here, it's like $50 for a CO2 tank. So, in Colorado, you could bring in fresh air and just, if you're wasting a little bit of CO2, no big deal. But up here, that really makes a big difference. So,
Yeah. Wow. That's a big difference. $650 to like $50. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just kind of constant things like that up here where you're like, oh man, it takes, that costs that much, or just getting things shipped up here. So there's definitely some unique aspects to growing up here.
Totally.
And especially with running the air conditioning, because with the mini split, you have that condenser unit, which really you can't run outside if it's in the wind. They do have kits you can get to run them in the cold weather, but for one client, we built basically like a enclosed doghouse outside of his shop where we put the condenser unit, and then there's a fan and a temperature sensor, so it'll kick on when it gets too hot, but that keeps that condenser unit at a nice cozy temperature during the winter. So that's a little tip if you want to set that up in the winter or cold climate.
Yeah, I found that those actually run better when they're hot.
Totally,
because they're designed to cool.
Yes.
So if you can trick the condenser into thinking that it's 80 or 100 degrees, it's actually going to cool the inside more efficiently and quicker, because it's
totally
mimicking the same temperature outside.
That's a great point, because recently I was noticing exactly like how my air conditioning was having a hard time cooling, and there was really no reason why it should be having a hard time. I was like early on in a grow where I wasn't even running dehumidifiers yet or anything, and my temperatures were high, and the condenser unit was sitting at around 50 degrees, and normally it's like I keep that doghouse around 80 degrees or so, or 100 even. So yeah, I noticed that once that temperature comes back up, that thing cools a lot more efficiently, which, like you said, it makes sense.
Yep.
Those things aren't if it's there's really not a reason that in terms of what the air conditioning unit's thinking, it's like there's no reason that thing would be cranking if it's 50 degrees outside.
Right.
So
exactly.
Unless maybe, I'm sure there's some that are more designed for grow rooms that might work better in that case. But
yeah, I know
because I've seen
air handlers are definitely taking the place on a larger scale.
Yeah.
But mini split heat pumps are definitely designed for the home grower and keep things easy and simple, and definitely efficiently cool any space.
Yep. Totally.
So we're going to take a quick break for our sponsor, and I think we picked a perfect one for this episode in Chris's passion about environmental controls. Coconut weather sensors. So if you guys don't have something that is monitoring your grow rooms while you're not in it, and it should have an app that goes right to your phone with the ability to set up monitoring highs and lows and send you alarms, then you're missing out, frankly. Coconut weather sensors, longtime friend of Growcast podcast, the whole family here. So very excited to help continue to spread their message with another podcast. So if you have ever been, away at a concert or out with some friends and wondering what's been going on in your room, or worse, got home from a night out and gone in and had your room be, 120 degrees because the air conditioning crapped out. If you've ever been in that situation, then you know that the investment into one of these monitoring systems is well worth it. And you've already probably made that investment if you've been in that situation. But if you haven't been in that situation, let us help prevent you that pain and agony. So head on over to coconut.com. That is KOKONAUT.com. And use the code GROWCAST. You'll save yourself 10% off of any of their smart sensors there. And just plug it into your room, plug it into your phone, set up those alarms, and you can monitor everything right from your smartphone. Temperature, humidity, a couple other things. I think they're working on CO2 levels. I'm not quite sure on that. But if they haven't, they should, because that's a good thing to know as well. So head on over to coconut.com and support the supporters of the show.
Yeah, that's I'll just say that's being able to, it's one thing to be able to look at your highs and lows, but being able to see that on a graph of, your temperature fluctuations and all that really gives you, that's key when you're not in the room. And just like you said, it's when I'll get like separation anxiety when I leave the grow room. So it's nice to be able to check in and make sure everything's going well.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that have like baby monitors in their grow room so that, little video cameras so they can see what's happening.
Right.
But that only gives you a little peace of mind. I remember when I was introduced to weather sensors, and the guy at my grow shop showed me his little graph, and he was actually looking at the CO2 levels,
Okay.
and he could tell when he was in his grow room the night before, because the CO2 levels will automatically increase because us humans expel CO2 in your grow room.
Right.
So he was like, I was in there from 5:30 till about 9 o'clock last night. So he can tell by
Yeah.
that, just the CO2 levels, if, for some reason somebody else was in his grow room when he wasn't expecting them to be. So it was a unexpected benefit, a layer of security, if you will, if you approach these things in a different way.
Nice.
So, Chris, do you have any unique grow tips or tricks that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Mostly, I try to keep things real simple. I feel like don't try to reinvent the wheel. I try to look into just basic agricultural practices from other industries and just stick to the simple principles. I'm kind of weary of some people if they say they have this secret tip or this special sauce. I mean, this stuff is really pretty basic, and if you just follow the fundamentals, then you're going to have a result you're happy with. One thing that I recommend to anyone that's just real simple is get one of those infrared thermometers. Get them on Amazon for super cheap, less than $100, and that way you can really just test your leaf temperature, because that's a key in the VPD concept, and so that just goes a long way. So that's what I'd recommend everyone to do.
So you've touched upon this a couple of times, Chris. So let's dig into it a little bit. What leaf temperature are you looking at, or what leaf temperature do you start to panic at?
Yeah, well, it depends on I use that VPD chart, so it depends on what your humidity is, but I shoot for around. I like to run a little warmer because I run high CO2, so I'll shoot for the air temperature to be in the mid, 82 or so, and then you want your leaf temperature to be a couple degrees below that. So let's say your leaf temperature is 79. I feel like that's optimal in, veg and early flower. I like to dial that back, maybe week 6, and drop some temperature degrees, as well as, I do once around week 4, I start slowly backing off on the humidity. And I've heard of people running higher humidity through flower, but I've had, if you've ever had botrytis issues or anything like that, I'm a little nervous to keep those humidity levels up. So yeah, I think, if you're at 79, 78 leaf temperature, then on the VPD chart, that's around 65% humidity. That's ideal in my opinion.
Cool, cool. So what type of person, in your opinion, creates the best grower? Like, what type of character traits or characteristics are most important for a person to succeed at growing really good cannabis?
Yeah, man, I would have to say, in my opinion, it takes a lot of grit and kind of persistence, because things are going to go wrong, and that's just, you're kind of constantly dealing with, you're putting out small fires here and there. You set things up, a pump malfunctions, a fan cuts off. It can be really frustrating and sometimes demoralizing. So the ability to just keep going and keep trying new things is key, and not letting it get to you. I mean, there's pretty much no step in the process at which you can't mess it up if you don't do, if something goes wrong. Even you can have the perfect grow and you put it in the dry room, and your environment gets off, and you can have botrytis, or maybe you dry it too fast, and then the cure doesn't go well. So we're always kind of trying to get to that perfect harvest, and you never really get there. So just it's a balance of, in my opinion, it's a balance of, you know shooting for that target, but then also not letting that get you down, and just, I guess, being happy with what you do get. So, but yeah, especially when you're setting something up, for the first time, there's just always any room you set up for the first time, there's always kind of a learning curve, even if you've been growing for a long time, different environments, and there's just little nuances that can get you. So, just the ability to deal with those problems and adjust your course. And things are going to go wrong, but you got to keep trying new things and not let that get to you.
Great. Yeah. I used to joke in Maine, where I'm from. We were allowed to have one employee in our grow operation. And I used to joke around with my employee after it'd been a week or so where things didn't go wrong, like a pump didn't fail or a bucket didn't overflow or something didn't happen. A fan didn't crap out. Anytime a week went by where something didn't need to be fixed, we'd actually go start looking for problems because we knew that the clock was ticking and our time was almost up. So might as well go figure out where that clamp was going to pop off the fan and start blowing hot air into your grow room or whatever it was. But like you said, there's always a problem or always something to do. So
I think it's what is it, Murphy's Law? If something can go wrong, it will. So that couldn't be more true for growing, especially in a home environment, because you're really setting things up, and there's just different variables growing in the house, in a house or in a home environment, that I think like on a commercial level, obviously growing commercially has its own sets of issues, but you kind of have to be really adaptable to grow in a home environment. So it's never going to be perfect, but you just have to work with what you have a lot of times.
Great advice. So Chris, to wrap things up, what's the last bit of advice you'd like to give every grower listening to you right now?
Yeah. For me, when I do any kind of consultation, we just like to start with really getting a clear picture of what a successful grow looks like for that client or that person. So I think that's really key, is just knowing the outcome that you're going for from the start. Not everyone has the same desired outcomes, and what works for somebody might not work for you. Instagram and social media and all these forums are great, but it's easy to I think you're looking at Jungle Boy's Instagram and trying to design your room off that, but those principles that work, in a big warehouse aren't going to work in your house. So kind of knowing what you're trying to accomplish from the start is going to, and then designing everything off of that piece is going to make a big difference in how successful you are, and also how you feel about your grow. Because I think that's really important, is to be satisfied what's coming out of that and not set your expectations too high from the start so that you're going to be disappointed, but having a clear, realistic picture of what you're trying to do with your space requirements, your budget, and then cascading things off of that. So I think that's really important, is, if you're growing, depending on what market you're in, maybe you're growing just for oil, that's going to look totally different than if you're trying to have the best quality flowers, which is also going to look different if you're going for a higher yield. So there's just a lot of different variables that's going to affect, the strains you put in there and how quickly you need to flip them into flower and different things like that.
So we had touched a little bit before I hit the record button about the future of our podcasting family here. And, I'm starting this other podcast, Homegrown Journals, and it really was based on exactly what you were talking about, how a grower kind of gets that size envy, if you will, when we're on Instagram and we're looking at the Jungle Boys or these huge warehouses where they're growing really amazing looking plants.
Totally.
But we can't replicate that stuff on our level. One thing that I really like watching is, I don't know if you've seen any episodes, but Cannacribs.
I haven't. Let's check that out.
And it's basically tours of huge facilities, and they get, down and dirty, but that's really great if you're looking to set up a huge facility. But we started Homegrown Journals to kind of replicate that Cannacribs or that Instagram envy,
right?
But for the home grower. We wanted to dig deep into a home grower setup so that any home grower listening or watching the show online would be able to just replicate exactly what that grower was doing from A to Z, whether that was grow room setup, strain selection, veg transplanting, all of it. And then if we can help them replicate that from A to Z, the only thing that is going to to be missing is that grower passion, the knowledge, and hopefully we just help build those or bridge those gaps as well. So
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's funny. I've never heard that term grow room envy, but it's totally true. I think of it like, if there's a lot of ladies that maybe feel bad about their body or something when they look at all these Instagram models. And I think that you can have the same thing happen as a grower. And also the fact that, people are only putting up their best, they're only showing the best part of their grow.
Sure.
I mean, and I'm guilty of that too. It's
Sure.
like you find that best nug to take a picture of.
Totally.
And no one is really sharing all the failures that you've had to get to that point. And which makes sense from a business. You don't want to turn your customers away, but it also, I think, would help if people shared more of the issues that it took to get to that successful level. And yeah, it's just, if you're comparing yourself to these companies that have millions of dollars of budget, it's just, that's not a fair comparison. I think the home grower, to me, I'm really passionate about that because I like the idea of trying to do what you can with the resources you have and not being reliant on these big, multi-million dollar companies, and kind of trying to take the power back into your own hands and create your own medicine. And the big mission that I have with Loud Gardens and the consulting is enabling the home grower to produce superior quality cannabis for a lower price than buying from the stores. So yeah, I'm really passionate about that.
There it is, folks. So Chris, how can our audience learn more from you, find you, connect with you, and enlist your services if they'd like to?
Yeah, reach out to me on my Instagram. The handle is 907 Loud Gardens, and shoot me a message. And I offer any kind of advice I can give, all that for free. I'm mostly here just to share what I know and also try to learn from other people. I think, there's just a continual process of learning and improvement. And I do have experience growing, and I know I have a system that works for me, but I'm always open to learning new things. And so, yeah, if you want to reach out, shoot me a message on Instagram. I'll help in any way I can. And I mostly charge to go on site up here. And so, yeah, I'm trying to share anything I can for free and just use that as a way to learn myself.
Awesome. Yeah. So, guys, if you've liked what you heard from Chris from 907 Loud Gardens, please don't forget, we have lots of other growing content available for you throughout our podcast family. But ultimately, if you liked what you heard from Chris, reach out to him. Reach out to us. Let us hook you up with Chris. Enlist his services. That's what we're here for. Chris has invested a lot of his time and effort to gain this knowledge that he shared openly and freely with you today. And he just told you that he's willing to continue to freely share that information with you. But if you're looking for that extra little bit of help, some hands-on attention, somebody to help you bridge that gap, you're having a problem in the grow room. Maybe Chris is the guy. Maybe one of our other homegrown helpers is the person that you jive with. Because when you're going to learn something from somebody, not only is their skills important, but the personality is important. So use this podcast and the time with Chris and the time with our bonus content here that I'll tell you how to get in just a second, and get to know these growers so that you know that when you're calling them up and you're looking for some extra help, that you already like their personality. You already know that they have the skills to help you overcome the hurdle that you're facing. So back to the bonus content. If you've listened to any other of our other episodes, we release all of our regular podcasts out into the world for free, and you can download those anywhere you listen to podcasts: iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. And but then we keep our guests around for 5 more questions. We get a little more personal, a little more silly, and then we release those on our website. You can go to thehomegrownhelpers.com/bonus or bonus content, and you can download the next 5 questions from Chris or all of our other guests just by giving over your email address, and then you can gain access to all of that rest of that content that we have stored there. So again, if you liked what you heard, subscribe, share, rate, review, head over, grab the bonus content, and give Chris at 907 Loud Gardens on Instagram a follow, and just let him know that you appreciated his time today. So thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
And we will catch you next time.